All right, we are going to get started now. Here's a little crazy, but with interactions. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what a community is, and then the types of interactions you see in communities and why those interactions are important to that community. So the first thing is, what is a community? So let's start with an organism. An organism is an individual living creature, right? So a tree is an organism, or a okay, so sorry, I got interrupted. So an organism is any individual living organism, like a pine tree is an organism, or a beaver is an organism, or a blue whale is an organism. A single bacterium is an organism. So size doesn't matter. Ability to do things doesn't matter. Like sponges are organisms, even though they don't even have tissues. They just have cells that work together. So they don't have tissues or organ systems. So none of that matters, but a living creature is an organism. When you put all of one species together in an area, that is a population. So all of the white-tailed deer living in, I don't know, the Congaree Swamp, or all of the chipmunks living in Table Rock State Park. Okay, those are populations. Now, to broaden it to community, a community is now looking at all of the organisms that live in an area. So now you're looking at not just the white-tailed deer in Congaree Swamp, but also the owls and the fish and the lizards and snakes and plants and all those things make up the community. So we're not looking at abiotic. This is still just living, but it's all of the living things living in an area at the same time for the same place for the same time. All right, I can explain the importance of interactions within a community. This is actually kind of coming from the very last slide in this. Let me slide this over a little bit so I can get down there quickly. Maybe. Nope, not that far. I should have used the other one that didn't have all the Nearpod stuff in it. So these communities the interactions that occur in communities are important because they allow the organisms in that community to get the energy and matter that they need. So that's either getting food because the interaction is food getting, or it's enabling the organism to have an easier life in other aspects. Sorry. That then enable it to save energy doing those things so that it can get food and use more energy to get the food. So it's either, we'll talk about that more in just a minute, but interactions can cause communities to change. So we always know that ecosystems are going to change. The environment is always going to change. And so communities that can change with that are going to be communities that are more stable, are going to be around longer. And so these interactions allow for some of that change, which makes these communities more stable. It also is going to determine how the organisms in that community get matter and energy, and that's necessary for survival and reproduction. So if your community is set up so that your organisms can't get what they need, they're either going to leave or they're going to die, and either one of those is going to cause your community to collapse. So that's not good. The interactions can affect how the populations are distributed. If all of the food is over here for the deer, guess what? The deer are all going to live over here. They're not going to roam around over in this area because there's no food. So these interactions are going to help that. Or if there's a predator over here, the deer are going to stay over here because, again, they're trying to stay away from that negative interaction. It can affect the abundance of populations. This is population size. So how many of an organism are present? If there's too many predators, they're going to eat all the organisms, all their prey. If there's not enough predators, maybe they'll have too many prey and then they'll run out of food or whatever. The prey will actually run out of food. It can affect population dynamics, the way that populations interact with other populations. It can affect patterns of species distribution and abundance. We've already talked about that a little bit. These can be positive, negative, or neutral. They can be modeled, they evolve, and they are controlled by a type of feedback mechanism. So if a predator eats too many prey, then there's not going to be enough food for that predator to keep eating. And so that predator is going to starve to death. And so what we see is if you have 1,000 wolves and there's 1,000 rabbits, that's not going to be a positive result, because what's going to happen is those 1,000 wolves are going to eat those 1,000 rabbits. Now there's no more rabbits, and now the wolves are going to starve. So you've got to have fewer predator than prey. And so there is that feedback control that keeps the predator population from getting too big and the prey population from getting too small and all that. Anyway, so those are the reasons and the ways in which these interactions are super important. So they help organisms get matter and energy, and they help the community change, which allows it to handle environmental change. All right, so now let's start looking at some of these different interactions. So the first one we're going to talk about is competition. And competition is any time two organisms want the same resource at the same time. That resource could be mates. So it could be two lions fighting over a lioness. That resource could be water. So it could be two bears fighting over a particular area of land because one, you know, it has a stream on it or something. It could just be food. It could be territory, because territory means food and water and all that kind of stuff. And so it's different things. Different organisms will fight over different, they'll fight for different reasons. But that's what competition is. Competition is, generally speaking, now when we think of competition, you think you've got a winner and you've got a loser, right? And so you would think, oh, it would be a positive, negative situation because there's a winner and there's a loser. But the reality is, even the winner uses energy. And so using energy on things you don't have to makes you a loser. That's not really how I want to word that, but it is a negative thing. And so competition is going to be negative, negative, even though there's a winner, because the winner still had to expend energy competing. If that second species hadn't have been there and there had been no competition, that species number one would have been better off. I can explain predation and the effect on each species. So predation is going to be a plus minus. The plus is going to be the predator, which is the one that is hunting, killing, and eating. And the minus is going to be the prey, because they're being hunted, killed, and eaten. And if they're eaten, that means they're dead. And so they cannot reproduce. I was going to say they can't survive and reproduce, but they're already not surviving, so they can't reproduce. I can explain parasitism. And its effect on each species. So parasitism is where one organism gets nourishment from another. And so it is going to be a positive minus situation again. And so the parasite is positive because they're getting nourishment and they're happy. And the host is negative because it's losing that nourishment. All right, I can explain herbivory and the effect on both species. So herbivory is just when herbivores eat plant matter, okay? So it is a plus minus, the herbivore. So just think about like a sheep or a cow or a goat or a bunny rabbit, right? Things that eat grass and hay and stuff, horses. So your herbivore is positive because he's happy, he's getting the grass or the whatever the plant, and then the plant is the negative because it's dying. It's not going to be around to survive and reproduce. I can explain mutualism and its effect. Mutualism is an interaction between two species in which species number one does something good for species number two, and species number two does something good for species number three. It's kind of like I'll scratch your back, you'll scratch mine. If you've ever heard that saying, it's that kind of a situation. So it is a plus plus. And there's all kinds of examples. A blind person and a seeing eye dog, right? The blind person gets eyes. Basically, the dog is their eyes, and the dog gets attention and love and food and shelter and all that stuff. The sea anemone and the clownfish we've talked about a lot before. If you Google mutualism, you'll find all kind of great examples. There's tons of them out there. All right, I can explain commensalism. Commensalism is, let me write it and not try to talk while I'm spelling. Commensalism is a relationship in which one species benefits, but the other is not helped nor hurt. It doesn't care. It doesn't care that the other species is there. So it's a plus zero. And so an example of this would be Spanish moss hanging in a tree. The Spanish moss is benefited, it's plus because it gets more water and better sunlight. And the tree is zero because the tree doesn't care. The Spanish moss is not super heavy. It's not hurting the tree. It's not blocking. It's on the branches. So it's not blocking leaves, which is where photosynthesis and gas exchange take place. So the plant literally doesn't care that it's there. All right, and then I can explain facilitation. And tell its effect on both species. So facilitation is where one species, if you know Spanish, facile means to make, it means easy. And so to facilitate means to make easy. And so facilitation is a process where one organism is making life easier for the other organism. And so an example of this would be like, the best example I can think of, there's a bunch of examples, but this is the one that always comes to my mind, is let's say there's a volcanic eruption. And so you have all this lava, and the lava is like big, hard rock. Well, small plants, little weeds and stuff will start moving onto that lava, and their roots are pretty strong. It's pretty amazing how how forceful they can push through, and they can start to break up that lava. And so by breaking up rocks, that's how you get sand and dirt. And so breaking up that lava allows the other plants to come in and live there. And so the little weeds and stuff are just doing their thing. They're just living. They're not like, oh, I'm paving the way for big trees. No, they don't care about the big trees coming in behind them. They're just trying to find somewhere new to live that they won't have to compete. And so they go out there and move into that lava. So they're either a plus or a zero. It may benefit them, it may not, but it's not going to hurt them. They're just living their life, but they're helping out another species. And so that other species would, in this case, would be the big trees that can now come in and live on that lava because it has been broken up and is available for them. So that's an example of facilitation. I can explain how interactions between species result in the movement of energy and matter. Sometimes this is really obvious, like predation, parasitism, and herbivory. Those three, literally, one of them, species one in this case, is gaining matter and energy from species two, like literally putting it into their bodies by eating that species. But in other ones, it's not quite as easy to see, like competition, mutualism, commensalism, facilitation. It's not as easy to see that transfer of matter and energy, and it's not always a transfer. Sometimes, like mutualism, this species is making this one's, whoops, that was supposed to be a smiley face, this one's life easier, and this one is making that one's life easier. Well, because it's making its life easier, it's helping it get resources more efficiently, or it's protecting it from predators. It is allowing that organism, let's just talk about this one. Like species number one is, let's talk about the sea anemone. Let me give you a specific example so you can understand what I'm saying. Okay, so the anemone is, they sting because they're kin to jellyfish. They sting, so they're providing protection. The clownfish lives in the anemone, so it's safe because it knows the anemone will sting anybody else that comes. And the clownfish cleans up the anemone, helps it stay healthy. Okay, so let's talk about the clownfish's benefit. Because the clownfish now doesn't have to worry about predation. It doesn't have to worry because the anemone is protecting it. It can use more of its energy and focus on survival and reproduction. Survival as far as getting food, not getting away from predators. And so the anemone is helping the clownfish get matter and energy by taking care of security, so to speak, for the clownfish. It's like the bodyguard of the clownfish. And so the clownfish doesn't have to worry about watching over his shoulder all the time, and he can just focus on getting food, making babies, those kinds of things, okay? Commensalism, let's look at the Spanish moss in the tree. The tree doesn't care, but the Spanish moss, because the tree is holding it up in the air, it's getting better gas exchange, better chance of getting water when it rains, better sunlight because it's up higher away from all the other things that might be shading it. So now, because the tree has made life easier for the Spanish moss, it can put more energy into things like reproduction. And so that's what it means. It doesn't necessarily mean, in this case it does, these guys are directly getting matter and energy from these guys. But in some cases, it's not. The anemone's not eating the clownfish, and the clownfish is not eating the anemone. They're kind of taking care of each other. But because they're making life easier for each other, they're freeing up some energy that may have been used on protection or something like that, or cleaning. They're freeing up some of that energy so that they can spend more energy on survival and reproduction. All right, I can identify models and graphs of each of the interspecific I just lost my place, interactions. All right, so let's kind of look through what this would look like. Some of them are going to look similar or the same, and so it might be hard to tell. With competition, what you would generally see is when they are not together, they're both doing better. But then when they are together and they have to compete, one of them will do a dotted line for when they're together. So dotted is together. One of them loses. So by the principle of competitive exclusion, they either have to die or leave. So they're gone. And the other one does less well because it had to expend some energy to compete. So when they're together, one's doing less well and one's gone. But when they're separate, they are doing much better. Okay, so that's kind of what competition would look like graphically. All right, predation. Predation is a very distinct looking graph. What you're going to see with predation is you're going to see the prey rising and falling, okay, and they're going to be up higher. And then you're going to see the predator. Let's see, that's going to be probably coming a little after. It's not a beautiful graph, but you get the idea. They're going to rise and fall in sync, except the predator's peaks are going to be slightly after the prey peaks. Okay, and the reason being, let's say this is rabbits and wolves. Rabbits have lots of babies because the wolves have more food, more baby rabbits. Oh, that's horrible to think about, to eat. They have more energy to make more babies, so they have more wolf cubs. So now that there's, or pups, I guess. Now that there's more wolf pups, their population increases, but now they're going to start eating more rabbits. And so as their population increases, the rabbits decrease. As the rabbits decrease, there's less food for the wolves, so some of them starve and die, so they decrease. As they decrease, that's less predators for the rabbits, so they start to increase, and so it just continues. And so this is what you're going to normally see with your predator and prey, where the prey is higher, and the reason the prey is higher is because that whole biological pyramid, if you'll remember, producers, primary consumers, which is where our rabbits would be, and secondary consumers, which is where our wolves would be. There's always going to be more primary consumers than secondary consumers. You've got to have more to support that top tier. So their population, this is population numbers, whoops. Their population numbers are going to be lower than the prey, okay, because they're higher on the food chain. All right, parasitism. Parasitism. You're going to have time over, really all of these, time is on the bottom and population numbers are on the side. So I may not label that on all of them, but just know that's what's happening. And we're going to do another together separate. So separate, if you'll remember from up here, separate with solid lines, together with dotted lines. So, and we'll say that this is, we'll say the black is the parasite. So when they're separate, which is the solid line, the parasite is not going to do good because they don't have any food. Whoops, you might need to see that. Okay, but the host is going to do amazing, okay, because nothing's eating them. When they come together, what you see now is you see the host is down here and the parasite, oh, that was supposed to be a dotted line. Sorry. I have some white out. I'll be extra and do a little white out just to make sure you know. Okay, there you go. You get the picture. Okay. The parasite is going to be doing better. And so actually, a lot of times what you'll see with this graph is you'll see this. You'll see the host is just like doing things, living life, okay? And then they introduce the parasite, and as the parasite population increases, the host population decreases. So you could also see a graph like that, where this is the host and this is the parasite. Okay? All right, next one, herbivory. Herbivory, it's going to basically be the same as the parasite. So let's look at that one again, and we can kind of put herbivory here. The herbivore would be the black. Parasite basically is eating the plant. So without the herbivore, when they're separate, the plant is doing great, and there is no herbivore, so they're dead, right? They're not there. When you put them together, now the herbivore does great, but the plants are not doing great. It's the same thing as the herbivore. As you get more cows, you're going to see less grass. So that's going to look very much the same. All right, mutualism. Save you a little bit of time, not making you watch me draw that again. All right, mutualism, what you're going to see with mutualism is separate was a solid line. So separate, not necessarily doing poorly, right? They're still like living life. But then when you put them together, they both do better. So they both increase in population more quickly, which means that means they're doing better. So they're getting more babies faster. And so that's what you would see with mutualism. You would see both of them jump versus commensalism, where, so still let's do separate like that. But with commensalism, what you would see is one species has 0 change. I do have to put a little bit higher just so you can see it, while the other one does better. Okay, so what you're seeing is the red didn't change at all because it's 0. It's not being hurt or helped. It's not going to drop because it's not being hurt. It's not helping, so it's not going up. But the black increased. So when you see both of them increase, you know it's mutualism. But if only one increases, you know it's commensalism. And then facilitation is going to look like either one of these. If in facilitation, the facilitator is benefited as well, they're both going to increase. But if it's normal facilitation, generally what you see is the facilitator stays the same and species number 2 increases. So facilitation could be either one of those. So just make sure you understand these concepts of these, what all this means, so that you can model it graphically, so that you can understand when you see a graph, you can decipher what's happening. You know, what does it mean that this line is higher, faster? Well, it means my population numbers, if this is 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, and these are years, it means I'm getting to 20,000 faster than I was without my friend. Okay, so that's what that's another thing you need to make sure you understand is when you're looking at these graphs, what is it actually showing you? Why are the lines higher, or in this case, lower? What does that mean? Well, if it's lower, it means that I'm rising in population slower. And so my population's not doing as well. Okay. I can describe ways in which prey have evolved defenses against their predators. So this is kind of merging evolution and ecology, which AP loves to merge things. And so let's look at some examples. Whoops, we just went past it. I went past it. Cryptic coloration, which is a fancy way of saying camouflage. And that is basically organisms can hide. They can hide from their predator, or sometimes you have predators that can hide from their prey. And so they're better hunters because of that. Warning coloration. Bright colors generally mean don't eat me or you will die, or you will at least get sick. Okay. But because of mimicry, we now know this cuckoo bee, harmless, yellow jacket, ow, it's going to hurt when it stings, put some toxin in you. But the cuckoo bee, because it's mimicking the yellow jacket, it is pretending to be harmful when it is actually not. Same thing with this caterpillar, this moth larva, and this snake. He's pretending to be a snake because he knows that you're probably scared of snakes and you're probably not scared of caterpillars. So that's mimicry, and that's kind of tied in again to this warning coloration or camouflage. So here's just a poison dart frog. Bright orange color says, hey, I'm poisonous. Don't lick me. Don't eat me. You better stay away or you can die. And so those two sometimes are kind of seen together. And there was one, plants. Plants' response to herbivory over time, they have evolved things like spines or thorns, chemicals like toxins, but also chemicals that just don't taste good, like garlic and mint, except we like garlic and mint. Did they do that on purpose? Did they say, let me grow out some thorns, pop, and out pop thorns? No, it was mutations. Those mutations helped them survive because the thorny branch was able to avoid being eaten versus the smooth branch, which got gobbled up. And so the thorny branch was able to survive and reproduce. So remember, evolution is never on purpose. You got to be really careful with your language on the AP exam so you don't say anything that makes it sound like you think that. All right. And then I can explain the competitive exclusion principle. Competitive exclusion principle, if you break it down, competitive means there's competition. Exclusion means somebody's going to be excluded. So the competitive exclusion principle basically says that when organisms compete, if they have the exact same niche, if their niches completely overlap, and they're going to compete, and that competition is going to result in a winner and a loser, and the loser is going to have to move to another niche or it's going to die. It cannot survive. The two are not going to continue to compete. It's too much of a waste of energy. And so that's what that principle says. The loser has to move or they will die because they're just going to keep losing. It's not like all of a sudden they're going to start winning, most likely. And then that brings us to resource partitioning. Competition does waste a lot of energy. So how can we prevent that? We can partition our niche. So let's say that there's an organism, and the tree is just a really good example of this, okay? And the organism eats off the whole tree. But then let's say this is some kind of bug. A new bug moves in. So let's say we got blue bugs and red bugs. And the blue bugs eat all over the whole tree to start with, okay? So they're just everywhere. But then the red bugs move in and they start to compete. They start to bump heads and say, we want to eat the food. No, we want to eat the food. Instead of completely kicking out the red bugs, because maybe they're not strong enough to do that, they kind of come to this mutual agreement. It's not conscious. They don't have a conversation. They don't shake hands, right? They just start to kind of almost like a magnet. They'll push away, the same ends of a magnet, like positive will repel. Same thing kind of happens. They'll kind of repel against each other. And then what you'll see is you'll end up seeing all the blue bugs in one part of the tree because there's no competition. And the red bugs will kind of take over the rest of the tree. And so this way they can share the niche, but not the same parts of the niche by partitioning or breaking up, putting a wall, so to speak, between that, breaking their niche up into pieces, to compartments, and only using a small part, they reduce their competition and therefore they reduce their energy waste. And so that is the idea of resource partitioning. We'll talk more about that in the third video if you want to know more. So that is it. That is all about all the interactions, how they help organisms, how you graph them, all that. And if you still have questions, let me know.